perspectives, different views, one voice.
Okay, welcome to the LDM Perspective, and we just wanted to start off quickly by reading out some feedbacks and comments that we've received from past episodes. This is something that we encourage all our listeners. If you do hear anything or want to feedback to us, you can comment through our Instagram page, and you can send a message at LDN Perspective. So we've got a comment here from Sylvian Croydon. She commented on our episode 31, why I'm black and I voted Conservative. And her comments were, the questions that no one has asked is, how many people that vote Labour actually think that Labour are trying to help them? And also, whichever party you vote for, does it still help your community? You can still help your community whether or not you like it. However, I would say that some parties don't actually help you progress, but they help you stay reliant on them. So technically, they are part of the problem. What do you think, guys?
Jeez, what's the first? Can we break it down? What's the first part of that question?
So, how many people of Labour are actually voting?
So, in regards to people that are like Labour strongholds,
how many of them are actually voting?
Voted?
Yeah.
As in this last.
Yeah.
I guess that's a bit. We will need some stats to
to
actually
actually
answer
know
that
that
question,
one,
because it's just a bit like. Because I guess, okay, so what she's trying to say is that there might be people that actually support Labour that might not have voted.
Yeah.
Hence the reason why the result turned out that way.
Yeah.
That's what she might be alluding to.
Yeah, I think that's where it's going, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit.
Yeah, we'd need some statistics on that.
Yeah.
But if they're Labour strongholds and Labour still retain, cause how many seats did Labour lose in this election?
They did lose a lot of seats.
Yeah.
A lot of their strongholds, they actually lost seats in their strongholds.
And so we'd need to see how close the margins were in those strongholds, because if it was a very close margin, then it certainly probably would have made a difference if, for example, Labour supporters did not vote in that particular constituency.
Yeah. Okay. Whichever party you vote for, you can still help your community.
That's true. That's true. I guess, obviously, like, we tried to qualify the whole conversation about I'm black and I voted Conservatives, because looking in the past, a lot of black people, because of their working class background, might vote Labour. But it doesn't mean because you're black and you vote Conservative, you can't help your community. Yeah. It's just more when you're looking at these austerity measures, what your community will actually have. Like youth centres, are they open, all these libraries and all these kind of things. So,
but then bear in mind on that kind of context to that, when, as you're saying about the question, certain people might thinking that they're too better. They're too important. They don't want to help the community anymore. They just want to move forward, compared to our last conversation on Diana Young. So she thinks that she's ahead of us now. She's done what she needed to do. So it's her own interest for her to move on and do what she needs to do. So that's why I think certain people would continue to help, but certain people might not want to go through that kind of role anymore, because they're too important now and just want to move on. So there's a two side of it, personally, in that context of it.
Yeah. And then also looking at how some parties don't actually help you progress. They want you to remain reliant on them. And so they are actually the problem.
But then if you look at that, if you're talking about progression, then you look at that, because a lot of times people look at Labour and they look at all these, like the social housing, if regards to that question, that's the only thing that you could foresee. Because instead of maybe buying a property, why should you buy a property if you could get the council offering your property? So it depends on what you see progression to be. Yeah. So I could understand that point, but I guess the only thing I'll say to that is that there are people that actually need this. Like there are people that need it. There are people that might not be able to afford to buy a property. So when they want to start to actually progress, it's like, where does progression start from? It could be that you're on social housing until you save enough to buy that property. So I guess by the other scale as well, you're on social housing, why should you buy a property? You could just save that money. I don't know.
But then the counter to that could be more, in terms of saving to buy a property, sometimes it's more of a mindset and habits and practices, and that has to be learned or taught. And you might be helping these people, yes, save money, but they're not necessarily got the mindset to be saving towards something or carry on.
What's that got to do with the party? Yeah, because that's more to do with just your habits and your mindset.
No. So you could have
instinctively.
policies in place that save you money or help you in that sense, but they're not actually helping you to get out of that situation.
Yeah, but
They're just helping you
policies
provide a short-term solution.
There's like policies like Help to Buy ISS. Did anyone actually open one of them?
Yeah, I have.
I got one.
I've got one too.
Yeah, but that's not Labour though.
No, but I mean, it's a policy. I never necessarily mentioned.
But the question is
the
referring
party.
to the party though. It's referring to the party making you reliant on them.
Yeah, but the thing is, we can hold parties accountable as well.
In what sense?
If it is, for example, within MPs that do all sessions within their constituencies, if you see that your member of parliament had pledged something and it's now 1 year, 2 years, and this is something which is essential for your community, you can as well raise the issue.
Yeah, now I get what you're saying. I think it's just more in the sense of making you reliant on them. So they'll give you certain things to help you,
Like
but
what?
it's
Like what?
No.
Yeah, because I think we need to qualify what we say reliant. Because
Like what?
you just put me on the spot. I just read the question. I can't think right now.
I think I guess saying that they're reliant, maybe that some people, for example, may stick to Labour and vote Labour regardless of what the policies are. Some people may not necessarily read the policies, but because Labour are historically for the working class, if you're from the background, you'll just vote for them anyway. You won't necessarily look at their policies. But if you look at who's leading the party, there will certainly be a difference in the policies that are being pushed forward.
Sorry, I'm just going to wrap this up. It's good feedback in terms of the comment, and we can definitely go into it more in another episode.
Yeah, it feels
So
like
if anyone does want us to touch on the whole political side of voting and stuff, we can definitely do a part 2 episode if you're interested. All right, so today's episode is: Are you blindly supporting human trafficking? I know it's a bit of a deep, strong one, human trafficking. A lot of people don't really think about that. But so I'm your host, Mo, that will be helping with this conversation today. I'm joined by my co-hosts,
Cam?
Ali?
Kojo.
and we've also got a special guest with us. We've got Pasca here.
Hi, I'm Pasca Mo.
Okay, thank you. And so I just wanted to kick it off basically by starting by what is human trafficking, just to give you a brief little description of it. And so what we found is human trafficking, this is a definition from the UN, is the trade of humans for the purpose of forced labor, sexual slavery, and commercial slavery exploits for the traffickers or others. So that's a bit deep. So yeah, what made me talk about it was really from an article which I read online, and it was an article which the title was "Police Make 14 Arrests on Modern Slavery Raids on South London Nail Bars." And the crazy thing is, obviously, I've been down like Wharf Road, from Wharf Road all up to Camberwell Road, and there's like about, 25 or 30 nail bars there? Am I right? Have you guys noticed that yourself?
Easily, mate.
Easily, yeah. So yeah, I just thought it was kind of crazy just in terms of how this was such a big thing. And so the article says that officers targeted 5 nail bars in Southwark in a 5-month multi-agency investigation launched concerns after raised vulnerable people were working in the venues. So they found 24 people in total, 19 adults and 5 children were found inside the addresses and are now being supported by specially trained officers. And they were escorted to nearby reception centres where they received medical treatment and support from the Metropolitan Police.
Right, question. What race are these?
So these people were Vietnamese.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is?
Why do I think that they were Vietnamese?
I mean, no, I'm saying, you mentioned the Vietnamese, right? Are they most not likely those people they're most getting victimized?
Yeah, I mean, it also comes from... Basically, I know this investigation was mainly triggered by a lorry which they found of 39 Vietnamese migrants that were found dead in a refrigeration truck in Essex. This was literally a month before this raid, 2 months before this raid happened. So it is a big problem in terms of Vietnamese people being transported over, and they're being promised to work in nail bars, restaurants, and even cannabis factories and prostitution and things like that.
Yeah, I found that article about the 39 Vietnamese migrants, that was completely shocking. And I think what it did do is it probably did shock the nation, because I think the issue of trafficking was probably brought to the forefront of people's minds as soon as that happened. I think in terms of that particular incident, and now I'm speculating, but I suspect that probably wasn't the first time that driver had trafficked people into the country, but that certainly was the first time, such a, tragic set of circumstances took place as a result of his actions in terms of trafficking. But I think what it has done is it's certainly raised the issue as to what is going on in terms of people being trafficked, and how much organized crime is attached to this particular practice.
You start.
Just to add one thing on the Vietnamese. Vietnamese are among the top 5 nationals who are trafficked into the UK.
Top 5?
Yeah, top 5.
Do you mind going through the list?
Might not give you all the list.
Right, what would be the top one? If you were to do 1 to 5, how would that go?
1 till 5, I know Vietnamese, UK, and the rate of trafficking internally within the United Kingdom has also really gone up.
Okay.
If you read the trafficking report from Home Office for last year, Nigeria, Sudan.
So Nigeria is part of the top 5?
Top 10 for Nigeria.
Top 10,
sorry.
okay.
Top 10, Sudan is in the top 10. Eritrea, the top 10. Albania is number 2 on the list. I think Vietnam is number 3. Yeah, so...
Now I wonder what nation is number 1 then? UK?
Yes. UK is number 1 for trafficking people.
Internal trafficking.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so high.
Really?
Whoa.
So when you say internal trafficking
British people.
Internal trafficking, okay, the main thing is vulnerabilities around communities within the UK, they themselves, including the number of children who have gone up. For example, I read a case of a young girl who grew up in care, and because she was so vulnerable, she met this, gentleman, a man, who then started to befriend her and groom her, and then later on traffic her. Now, this is because actually for children who grow up in care, they have issues around trust, they have issues around, attachment and building relationships. So then they become really vulnerable to trafficking if someone, come across as they can offer that protection or the love that they could probably be lacking, or the care.
So that's the whole grooming. It goes along
with grooming.
With grooming and the whole, because I've heard cases in the whole Bradford. They keep talking about Bradford and in the whole
Bradford,
grooming,
yes, Manchester, and all that.
Okay.
But again, in the UK, the level of awareness is really high around human trafficking. So therefore, awareness comes with increase in referrals and identification of cases as well.
Seriously, because I find it a bit oblivious when you come in general in the community. Because, for example, when going to work, this is a scenario, this is an example. When I go to work and I see children after school around 3 o'clock or ish, I see them just on their scooter moving so quick. The parent is all at the back, and then I see someone's talking to them, and then I'm looking back and I'm looking at the parent. I'm thinking, why are you not alerting to your children? Do you understand? I find that a bit weird. How they don't. It's is it not taught in school or what?
Right. There are schools probably who could be doing, awareness around human trafficking directly. But again, awareness through community groups, churches as well is going on. Now, when it comes to parents, I have had incidences as well where you find children, they are loitering around, and you talk to them. It's rather too late. Are you not supposed to be home? And they say, huh? Or they're ignoring you, or they're saying, leave us alone, things like that. I think the biggest thing is that parents, as parents, we need to really realize that there are risks outside there that our children can be facing, and take up the responsibility of teaching them about these issues of human trafficking and modern slavery and grooming, which are happening, that there are actually real issues happening. Because it's our responsibilities.
It's interesting that you do bring that up, Pascal, especially with young people, because through my work as a solicitor, I've been made much more aware of slavery and exploitation taking place in terms of younger people. And there's a practice now in the court where if a young person is charged with a particular offence, so for example, it could be supplying drugs, and that there's evidence that they might be exploited, then there's a referral to the national referral mechanism, and they sort of categorize the child as being a victim of modern slavery, and that effectively is a defense to those particular offenses. And so there's starting to be sort of a much more increased use of that mechanism in order to identify children that are being exploited. But on top of that, I've had conversations with other professionals, especially teachers at school, and with those conversations, I've been told that some gangs are targeting children under the age of 10, because if anyone knows, the legal age of criminal responsibility is 10. So if someone below the age of 10 is arrested for a particular offence, there are no legal consequences. They can't be charged, they can't be prosecuted. And so from what I hear, a lot of gangs are recruiting kids under that age and starting to groom them into particular crimes.
But then would you not say in that kind of context to it might not be trafficking?
It's not human trafficking, so to speak, but it's a form of modern-day slavery.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to add to the definition of human trafficking, which Moses made. If we say trade, people might think that, oh yes, there is a sticker putting for sale. See, I'm here. The thing is, there's human trafficking, which involves recruitment, transportation, harboring, or transferring a person, to another place by use of deception, coercion, violence, or abuse of power, or using vulnerability of a person. In this case, the child is vulnerable, so exploiting them for purposes of exploitation. Now, the exploitation can be sexual exploitation, forced labor, it can be domestic servitude, criminal activities, which you're talking about, or organ harvesting, which I think he's going to talk about it later. And again, the other part is modern slavery, which does not necessarily involve the movement or someone transporting someone around, but rather, using debt bondages, threatening them, and putting them in a control of slavery, like they have no choice, threatening them, If you report, or we will report you to authorities, this will happen to you. So the victims live in that fear, and they're so vulnerable. So that is modern slavery. So the case that you're talking about is a case of modern slavery where children are being exploited.
So just on that point, though, I was thinking, because when I checked the Home Office stats regarding modern slavery and human trafficking, it seems that this has been going up in the past couple of years. So then I guess the question I'll ask is it because on one hand the law is now being extended to cover situations in the UK where a child has been coerced into a situation of selling drugs, and now obviously that's now coming up in the stats? Or are we seeing different things at play here? Is it just a matter of that, or is there other things at play here that needs to be considered as to why this is increasing of late?
Right. With Human trafficking and modern slavery, there are indicators that authorities or those who are making decisions on, referrals to determine if someone is a victim of human trafficking or not would normally look at and pick on. For example, they could be looking at the control over the victims. So control of movement, situation where documents are taken away from them, debt bondage, psychological trauma, or physical violence, which are, happen to them. So there's so many indicators that they look at. So you find that sometimes when you're looking at a case, you're just not looking at that one thing. You have to open up your mind and discuss and ask this person a lot of questions in order to be able to pick some of the indicators. So because of this, you find that so many cases can then turn out to be a case of modern slavery or a case of human trafficking. And if these indicators are not there, then,
The reason why I asked that, just before you come in, Ali, I know you're into this, another leading question. The reason why I asked that specific question is because when you look at the case of this Vietnam, there's slavery, and you look at war fraud, and you look at the nail shops, the key thing here is the economic factors, right? So these people are leaving one country to come into another country, and they've been sold this dream of better economic kind of pastures in order to do this. So I was just asking in regards to the drive of the increase, is it because of economical factors in other countries leading to this? Or is it because of the awareness that has been... Do you get where I'm going with that?
Yes.
That's why I asked that specific question. So is it part to do with those economical challenges in countries as well, and people being sold that dream?
So when you say economic challenges, are you saying basically, are we funding these nail shops?
Not necessarily.
I'm
not even getting there yet. I'm more
saying they're facing
the parent country that they're in. They're
some
facing
low-level income places where they're just facing extreme levels of poverty.
And then they see this as a way of coming out, even though they know that it might be very dangerous. They know that if they do come here, they might be able to sustain or whatever dream that they sold. I'm just asking, does that go part and parcel in regards to this increase in issues being reported?
Okay. Right. So, very good question. Because, with human trafficking, there are so many factors. There's the push factor, then the pull.
What do you describe as the push factor?
The push factor is basically situation at home.
Okay.
Or countries of origin.
Yeah.
How is it there? So here we'll be looking at, the economic issues you're mentioning, poverty, maybe family breakdowns, or maybe lack of employment, or political situation. So basically those sort of, issues that would make people want to look for opportunities or an escape out of that country or community. Yeah. Then the pull factor is basically situation in the destination area where they're going to.
Okay.
Yeah. So push factor is source country. Pull factor, destination area. If they're going to Europe, so maybe they're looking for greener pastures, and that's what they're thinking, oh yes, we can get jobs there. Or, the message going back home is that, oh yeah, you can get a free house. And I work with victims of trafficking since 2004 up until last year in August. Wow. So basically the issues like, when you go to Europe or you go to the UK, you will get free education, you'll get a good job, the government will give you a free house. So all these things wanting they want to go. And again, in the countries here, for example, if there are demands, the demands for, cheap labour.
Which goes into most things.
Exactly.
Because there are stories of people travelling from North London to come to South London to do their nails.
Yes.
Because of the demand and that cheap labour aspect that you're going into as well.
The demand for cheap labour. Yeah. So there are these people who establish their nail bars. Yeah. And yes, legally, minimum wage applies in this country. And then it becomes expensive, probably. They want to maximise, profit. So they look for these alternatives. Oh, yes, we can bring someone, pay them close to nothing, and then and this is driven by greed, which is bad. So
Mm.
we're going to look deeper into trafficking from Africa and how it affects us, the African communities as well. So we'll go deeper into the source countries from Africa as well. Can I add one thing on your question?
Yeah.
There's one thing which is facilitating factors.
Okay.
Facilitating factors could be these issues of free movement, so it's really easy to smuggle people across borders. You mentioned other things, Africa. In West Africa, the ECOWAS society, there is free movement across borders. So it's very easy to traffic someone from Nigeria to Niger to cross over, take them to Libya, because the economic community of West Africa, ECOWAS,
organization or whatever.
Yes.
It's along those lines. I know.
And the same thing applies with Europe. Because of the free movement, you find that, it's easy to smuggle, and traffic people across borders. Right. So Albanians, when they cross over, that's why they're also among the top, nationals being trafficked into the UK. Okay.
I was just, and I'm not sure if you have this.
The Taken film, that was on the Albanians, right? No, Taken.
I think so, Taken,
That's what it was about, human trafficking.
because I guess in regards to the actual question that was posed by Mo, and just drilling down using that example of this wharf road and the nail shops and this demand, because obviously we create the demand, didn't it? I say we because I do pedicure, so I am implicated in this. I am known to go into a wharf road to do a bit of a pedicure. So then I guess this is something that you move on with, innit? The factors and how we play out these kind of scenarios, because we want cheap, and then what that kind of leads to. But I need more to think, but I just...
because, I mean, the concern really, like, in the title is, are we blindly supporting the human trafficking? So, because of our, economic situations, our money's a bit tight at the moment, we might opt for that cheap version. It may not be the best, it may be a lot quicker, but it satisfies us short term, and it's a lot easier, so...
Yeah, but it's funny how South London became like the hub for like cheap deals. And I realised this in uni where I had someone just saying to me, I'm coming to South. I was like, but you live on the other end of London. Like, yeah, because I could get it for £10. I have to pay £20 where I am, or whatever the price was at that time. And I found that quite fascinating. That was the first time I actually heard of it. But I never actually drilled it down to see how are these people providing such cheap labour in that sense.
But as a disclaimer though, we're not saying that all nail shops run by Vietnamese are doing human trafficking, yeah? We're not saying that, right?
It's interesting that you bring up the fact that it seems like South London seems to be a hub for a lot of these nail salons. And is there a particular reason why it's one part of London over another, or is it just a case of chance? It just happens to be South London.
Like I said, on Wharf Road alone, there's a good 30 nail shops, all next to each other, literally.
And you haven't even added Peckham to it.
Yeah.
From one end to the other. So that's interesting in itself.
So we wanted to let Pascal just tell us a bit more about the work that you've been doing and how you've been kind of trying to combat this.
I did have one question for Pascal. So in terms of the work you do, you work alongside a lot of agencies legal agencies, so police, I'm assuming, Crown Prosecution Service. I just wanted to sort of know what your take on prosecuting these sort of cases or taking these cases to court, what effect the Modern Slavery Act has had on bringing these cases to court, because I know prior to the inception of that particular act, it may very well have been difficult to have proven that trafficking was taking place. So I just wanted to sort of get your take on it.
Do you mind giving us the day of that act, when that act was?
Well, the act is 2015. That was when it received its royal assent. Yeah.
But it wasn't really put in place until...
I don't have the particular date when it came into effect, but
it's 2015, yeah. So in terms of, I didn't write down the questions. So in terms of the effects of the Modern Slavery Act and how it has had in prosecuting perpetrators of trafficking. I think looking at the statistics and the number of cases which has been tried in court, and also those who have, been penalized for trafficking, by the fact that since 2015 that has gone up. One good thing that came with the Modern Slavery Act is the fact that it strengthened multi-agency working. So the police are not just working alone, but they're working with other agencies and other organizations. I work with the Salvation Army, but for the last 4 years, I've been working on trafficking with the Salvation Army, and there are, anti-slavery networks which are established in different regions, and there is cross-sharing of, learning and key points and identifying how, different agencies can actually strengthen their responses in tackling human trafficking. So, and one good thing is that with the Modern Slavery Act came also a lot of training and building capacities of the police. When I first started working, I was working in a safe house, and basically sometimes the police would have no idea, what the indicators of trafficking would be. And then when I joined the Salvation Army, the police would maybe send you a referral, or probably you refer a case to the police, and they say, but this is a domestic violence case. And you say, no, this is a trafficking case. These are the indicators. And then they would take so long to respond, maybe interviewing victims or even doing actual investigations and that. And yes, there are procedures. So there has been a lot of capacity building and training and a lot of investment within the police force to make sure that perpetrators of trafficking are actually prosecuted, for the crime that they are committing.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question is, why they didn't implement this before, the police force? Because obviously we, the community or the public, will think that the police are supposed to know it all. They are the eyes, they are our everything. So why they're not understanding? Why didn't they understand this all before? Because they use the power. I personally believe, my opinion, police use their power to their advantage towards people, but what they're supposed to work on, they don't do it. So why is that? Why is it now they're trying to come into it and starting to work into this now?
I think, based on my experience, it is purely down to the fact that initially the gravity or how serious the issue of human trafficking was not strongly grasped by everybody and all the sectors, So there was that issue of awareness as well within and among the police forces, but that is something which the government, the UK government, has put in a lot of investment. I'm not here to talk on their behalf,
It's fine.
but
We
they
know
have
you
put
work
on.
for the Home Office. Some secret agent infiltrating all the infrastructure.
And if we know, in 2015, when the Modern Slavery Act was passed, Theresa May made the fight against human trafficking as one of the key priorities.
Well, she
That's
did that.
just-
But this
she
time
did.
around, she was taking people to the Caribbean. Let's try to find this. Let me just get them in the Caribbean.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So that's right. I couldn't help myself. But that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's interesting. That's good.
All right, yeah. So you're going to tell us a bit more about the sort of work that you've done and how
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I've already talked. You can now know my voice. Well, Pascamo, I started working on the issue of human trafficking in 2004 from a safe house.
Do you mind, just before, please hold that thought.
Yes.
I guess for me, I want to drill down. Why human trafficking? Of all the jobs that you could do, why? What, is there like a personal experience that I wouldn't think of having a job as, in all honesty. So I'm quite intrigued to understand your train of thought of landing there in the first place. I know you're going to go into what you've done after, but
Yes. Well, it's interesting because when I saw that job advert
Yeah.
at the time, I related it mainly to my experience. I come from Uganda, and I was born, and I grew up, and I got married in a war-torn region, and during that season. So I used to work in a reception center for child soldiers. So when I saw the advert for the job to work in a safe house for victims, with victims of trafficking, I thought it was a good opportunity to use some of my experiences and skills, working with child soldiers in Uganda, to work in a safe house. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's quite enriching, though. Oh,
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, sorry, carry on with that.
Right, so just like I've just been saying, I started my journey quite long ago, working with child soldiers in Uganda, and then 2004 I started working with a company in Birmingham, Midland Hearts, in their safe house. It was a safe house for male victims of trafficking. So that is just day-to-day interaction and support with victims of trafficking, or survivors, to be more positive, because they're already out of the situation. And then 2005, I started to work with the Salvation Army as a referral officer, and again, so at the front line, taking direct referral for victims through telephone, or by email, from the police, from the community, or self-referrals from the victims themselves and other agencies. A really challenging role, as I could say, because getting to hear all the stories from victims, what they have experienced. So
I can imagine it must be emotionally overwhelming.
Yes. Actually, I still remember most of the cases where, after speaking to victims, I would go in the bathroom and I would look in the mirror and say, but why would people do this? Because sometimes you cannot believe that a human being would treat another that way. It's sad.
Yes,
yeah. So I work as a...
Do you have a lot of sympathy in that as well? Do you put your emotional into it? Or do you separately...
As a human, if someone is going to say that they're working with people and they're hearing all the sad stories and they're maintaining professionalism, and probably after doing the assessment, oh yeah, it's just another case, put it aside, then they are not human. As a human, you would still feel the pain, but how you deal with it is where the professional bit comes in. Yeah.
Because I guess, you get a bit desensitized, isn't it? If I can understand why you asked that question. Because it's just like
What's a safe house?
Well, a safe house is basically...
That's the first thing I came in my head.
You just call that safe house?
Trust me, I've literally pictured that movie. I've gone through the scenes already.
Is it quote the movie of the day?
Yeah, movie of the day. Quote what safe house.
So a safe house is basically an accommodation which is used to house survivors of trafficking. These places have got confidential locations and addresses. They wouldn't be shared with anybody unless...
There's one Road, you know the McDonald's behind the McDonald's?
I don't think so. In fact, it would not be easy for someone to know that this is a safe house. Like when I used to work in a safe house, even the neighbors didn't know that it was a safe house.
Okay.
So just to reassure, if anyone has ever experienced trafficking and you think you're going to be put in a safe house, just know that you are safe in a safe house. Yeah.
Do you experience difficulties with, say, individuals that are placed in safe houses? Obviously, they've probably been in that particular scenario situation for quite some time, and so they're conditioned in sort of, I guess, a slave master sort of mentality, to the point where you may put them in a safe house and they may just go back and return to the situation because they're completely used to it. Or
You meaning in terms of re-trafficking?
Or going back to that
the dependency.
Yeah.
The dependency syndrome.
They brainwash you and
Yeah. Right. So in a safe house, there's a lot of work which is done with survivors of trafficking. Work around, building relationships, trying to build trust, because most of them, again, will have lost trust in the system, trust in building relationship. I've seen survivors who, after they enter the safe house, they wouldn't want to step out because they think when they step out, they're going to meet the traffickers, and all that. But again, there are move-on plans for when people are in a safe house. Right, so in most cases, the decision-making process which the UK Home Office takes is that when someone is placed in a safe house, sometimes they will have already got the reasonable grounds, and this is just preliminary decision to say that, oh yeah, based on your story and these indicators, we think you're a victim of trafficking, and that they would be placed in a safe house for 45 days to 60 days, and that has changed now under the National Referral Mechanism reform, which happened last year, that victims can stay for longer than that. Then the last decision is the conclusive ground decision. That is when they have done all the investigations that they needed to really, conclude that the person is actually a real victim of trafficking or they are not a victim of trafficking. And then after that, they are supposed to be supported to move out of the safe house into the community, or depending on their individual circumstances, others can be supported back to return to their home countries if it is safe to do so. But again, all the work is done with the survivors.
That's huge.
It is. It's a journey with the survivors. So the dependency syndrome, which you're talking about, or making them want to say, oh yeah, we've been here for so long, I want to go back. Yes, I've encountered survivors who would say, I just want to go back home, and that is when they feel it is safe for them to go. There are others where you find that it is not safe for them to go, so all they want is that protection and a place of safety.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how would you be able to tell us more about Africans that are being trafficked into the UK? Is that something?
Because you mentioned Nigeria, Sudan, Eritrea.
Yeah.
One of the top 10.
Yeah, do we know the specific? Because I guess what we did is that we mapped the whole Vietnam to some of the nail shops, and there are other things. Is there like a trend regarding from Africa, the specific kind of industries that they might be trafficked into?
Yeah.
Is there any kind of...
Right, so when I was talking or introducing myself to you, I mentioned a referral officer thing, but my last role was a project manager where I managed a project which was in Nigeria and the Philippines, but I also got to work regionally across Africa and Asia.
Cool, I want your job. That's what I want to do. I want to travel.
Yeah. Too much traveling. If you're a family person like me, you want to stay home. Yeah, so we did a mapping of the trafficking routes and also looking at the different nature of exploitation along these routes, plus the destination where the victims would be taken from across Africa and across Asia. So I will focus on Africa here.
Cool. Yeah.
First of all, if you read the Trafficking in Persons report 2019 for the whole world, you'll realize that Africa has got a very high vulnerability to trafficking, with so many, women. Actually, I got one statistic here. Nigeria, 75% of women and unaccompanied children trafficked to Italy in 2018. That is quite high. Over 800,000 victims of Africans, mainly young women, children and young men, are trafficked across borders. Trafficking networks in West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, looking at Sierra Leone, looking at Burkina Faso, Niger, all linking towards Libya to cross the Mediterranean Sea and come to Europe. but also other trafficking from Nigeria going down to South Africa. You know, again from Nigeria crossing over to East Africa to go to Emirates, the Arab.
Oh, okay.
Yes, United Arabs, the Middle East, that's it, going to the Middle East. So you find that the route is really crisscrossing. Now looking at East Africa, trafficking from Eritrea, coming up to Europe via Sudan route, then connecting with the Sudanese, going through Libya, coming to Europe, you know. Then Eritreans also being trafficked, going through to the Middle East, Ugandans, Kenyans crossing over to go to the Middle East. So the trafficking route, it just keeps, you know, crisscrossing around like that. In terms of the nature of exploitation, most of the Nigerian women traffic to Europe mainly for, you know, sexual exploitation.
Seriously?
You know. Majority ending up in Germany or Italy or coming to the UK and being, and Spain, you know, into forced prostitution. Those going to, mention it again. Middle East. Those going to the Middle East, also sexual exploitation and domestic servitude. Like majority of the East African nationals, you know, domestic servitude is really, really high, you know, being taken to the Middle East. Now, forced labor for the men normally, you know, being used just to provide, you know, criminal activities or things like that. And some of them, well, for the case of Uganda, I've heard of some of them being recruited as security guards, but then when you go, you don't see your money, you can't leave, you can't do anything. You're actually not a guard. You're a guard being guarded. So it's just so complex. Yeah. So, but one thing is that trafficking and exploitation of African nationals is something which is of high prevalence, not just coming to Europe, but also within African countries. You know, within countries itself, Nigeria to Nigeria, you know, Ghana to Ghana, you know, like that, internal trafficking and exploitation is also so high. That's why there are countries which are like their source country, they are destination country, but they're also transit country where they're just passing through. Yeah,
because obviously with the whole, looking at Africa, in particular in Ghana, I know there is the whole, like having like a housemaid, right? Who will normally sometimes come from the village somewhere because the family wanted the person to maybe to be educated, so they get a promise of you go to school and all those kind of stuff.
Yes.
That's what you're referring to, and then they'll come and just work in the house, washing people's clothes and cooking for their thing. Yeah, so it is
or for the case of children, sometimes they are trafficked from the rural areas into the cities and maybe used as street beggars or used to commit criminal activities that you mentioned before. So it's just like, you know, it's like a ring, the gang operating, you know, also within the communities sometimes.
Yeah, what I was mentioning about previously about Africa is that all this sounds so good, but looking into this, would you not say is probably mainly lack of the economic, like meaning that Africa is not in a Western,
like what, poverty kind of thing?
Yeah,
driven?
poverty, like, yeah, because I understand what you're saying. UK, Western UK is one of the highest, right? Don't get me wrong, I understand that, but at the same time, Africa also has this human trafficking, which is like so affecting within the internally itself, right? But from my understanding, the way I'm seeing it is, if Africa has the same kind of like moral understanding like Western, like money, economic, working class, this and that, I don't think Africa will be too exploited to as much. But then bear in mind, within the internal side of Africa itself, we've been doing it for years. It's not just the start of it. This has been happening for years. It's just that now civilization is more exposed and understanding that is actually happening within Africa itself. But we have been doing it.
I do. I guess I get what you're saying, isn't it? So I guess what you're saying, because it's been happening a long time in Africa, there's opportunity for networks to expand and grow.
Exactly.
And become bigger over a substantial period of time, simply because it's been going on for such a long time.
Yeah, there.
They are seen as the oracles. I watched this documentary where you had, and that's the thing. Some of these examples. So the example that was given is that they were farmers, young farmers, in regards to the produce that they were making. They were not getting any. They were either being bought for cheap, or there were other, as they call, free trade. So you have other European countries that are just dumping the same produce into the market. So even if you're producing it, in regards to when it actually gets to the market, you almost have to sell higher than the other produce that are coming from Europe.
Right.
So in regards to competition, you don't really have grounds to compete because it's economies of scale. And obviously with some of these farmers as well, from that specific documentary, they've taken loans from banks. So you've taken out a loan to start this farm, but then no one's buying your produce. And then they get stuck in a situation where it's either I stop what I'm doing and try to find a way to travel abroad and try to get some economic pastures, or I just stay in this kind of that's just one thing I came across whilst I was doing this kind of research. I've seen there are a lot of young people that were traveling abroad because they found that in the countries that they were in, they were not getting there was not the right systems for them to sustain their family or whatever way that you want to look at it, kind of thing.
I'm not going to 100% deny, both of your points in relation to that, but I'm going to just say something about attitude, referring to young people who tend to come over. I'll give an example with my work in Nigeria. You find that someone could be having business which is really, relatively good to sustain them. But again, there is this attitude of, get rich quick syndrome, because maybe Moses is in the UK, when he goes back home, he's driving this 4x4 and all that, and then all of a sudden, I want to be like Moses, So the get rich quick syndrome, the hardworking thing and the patience of saying that I need to build my life, is something which is fading a little bit among us, the African community. We might not, I'm not saying we're lazy. I'm saying sometimes we set these expectations so high that we want to get there immediately. And then we take the risk. You sell your house, you sell your land, you sell your business, you take a huge loan, and then you're putting all this money in the hand of a people smuggler to smuggle you, take you to Europe in this land of uncertainty. You don't know where you're going, what you're going to do there. So this is a blind risk that, our people are taking, and we need to change that attitude.
Can I add to that? I hear your point, but bear in mind also, we Africans that are in this Western world in the first place, we go back and give a false allegation.
Yes.
Right?
False impression.
Yes. So once that happens, they don't give us the right information. For example, my country, I'm from Sierra Leone. We call ourselves JC, just come. I'm working very hard here. I know I'm sweating, right? Very hard. But when I go back home, I'm buying the expensive brand, Gucci, Prada, Louis Vuitton, just to fake it. So then, in their eyes, I'm doing well. But not knowing that I'm actually suffering. Because in this Western world, all we think about is what? Pay our bills. And then the remaining that is there, we take that and try and save it. Or most of the time, we're trying to go holiday. It depends on your priority. But what I seem to find within the African community, we do not tell the truth. Maybe our generation, the younger one, when they go back home, they tell the truth. But like my parents, I've never seen my mom will look good, dress good in this country. But as soon as she goes back home, she will dress from Monday to Sunday, every different outfit, right? She will do it. And she will make her makeup. Her shoes, she will have 2 bags of shoes. So when people are seeing that, but even though she doesn't talk to them, but when people are seeing her thinking, okay, I want to go there. But as you mentioned, they don't know what the destination is.
I think Go on, I'll let
No,
you.
the flip side to that, because I'm speaking from personal experience within my family. So one of my cousins in Ghana, he, when I've travelled to Ghana, I don't necessarily set an impression that I'm rich and I've got loads of money and things are rosy, but he has, I guess, this ambition to want to travel to the UK and has tried to do so by any means necessary. It's interesting that you mentioned South Africa, because he actually ended up there and wanted to try and cross over into the UK, but was unsuccessful there. And he's currently in Morocco now. So he's trying to go into the UK. And, he'll constantly say, well, I want to come to the UK because, the situation's better here. I can work, I can make more money, I can save up. And my mum would quite often say to him, well, no, there are opportunities in Ghana. You just need to open your eyes up and seize those opportunities in order to go forward. But he...
No, go on.
I mean, and
I'm just eager to come in.
And he certainly, and I guess from his perspective, he fails to see it any other way as far as he's concerned. He's fixated on that goal of ending up in the UK, and regardless of what anyone says to him, it won't make a difference.
Yeah.
But then,
I did want to move the conversation on after you, though.
yeah,
Go on.
so I think it's interesting that Ali mentions that point, and you mentioned it earlier. But in regards to even how we look, the understanding is that the person that travels to the Western world is able to build a house, a brick house, buy a land, build a house, come on holiday, show. So it's very
Justifiable.
it's justifiable from their angle, from how they see it. It's very justifiable for them to have that mindset. But then on the other angle of it, regardless of me going to Ghana or going to another country, I am on holiday. Like, we go on holiday with a pot of money to spend because we've had a very long year or whatever it is. So, do you get what I mean? So, on that parallel, it's not necessarily that someone is like going to show off, even though that's part of it. I'm not disputing that. But it's also that I am on holiday mood. Like, something that I won't buy £10, I'm on holiday, I buy £10. It's not a big deal. Do you get what I mean? So, I guess it's that parallel and understanding.
Sorry, you said two things. You said, you take a stack of money and go to Africa and spend. Another thing, you said that when Africans are here, they are justifying to able to buy a house back in home. My dad hasn't been in Western. Has bought a land, built a house, can take a stack of money and use it. Just prior to what we do here. It's just that our mentality, when we go back home, we just don't, I don't know, it's like we don't educate them enough to understand this is not the way, because I want, personally, my age, I want to go back home. But how do I go back home? Because I don't have anything there to start off, or I need to at least save up a bit to go there, because it's going to be tough, because I don't know anything there. But I'll prefer to stay there than here. That's my understanding.
I want to add one thing to. I know you want to move on, but something which we need to know is that migration is not a bad thing.
Yes.
Okay, so wanting to come to the UK or Europe or going Italy, anywhere you want to go, it is not a bad thing, but we need to encourage people and teach our people to actually use the right means, right and safe means, and make that informed decision. That is the important thing, because it is only through that way that they can actually avoid the trap of falling into the hands of traffickers.
I totally agree.
But one point that you made that I don't agree with, I agree to a certain extent, that because my dad is in the same situation. Like, he's got lands, he's got houses and stuff. But then when I'm looking at Africa, my dad is seen as someone that has disposable means of income.
Yes.
Now, a lot of the young generation, and I have friends in Ghana, when I speak to them, they don't have the same access to money, right? So everything that we're saying on one hand is that, yes, see Africa in a good light and try to work. There is challenges in Africa. There are systems that don't support that. So I don't want to be on here just saying to people, the issue is because the people there are not looking at opportunities within Africa. I understand that conversation. But the same parallel conversation is that there are challenges within Africa that some of these people find very difficult. That's why they want to migrate. So that has to be a parallel conversation.
You just need to do it the right way.
Yeah, just need to do it the right way.
Just needs to do it
Definitely
right.
not. I totally agree.
Yeah. Okay, no, I mean, I did want to go on to the whole. There was a statement which was released from the Home Office. There's an article I read. So the Home Office had to rewrite their guidance on handling asylum claims for women trafficked into the UK from Nigeria after it emerged that the advice they claimed to victims that they should return to their African country, that they return back as wealthy from their prostitution or held in high regard when they go back home. So this caused a lot of controversy. I know MPs Diana Abbott and David Lamley both tweeted concerns, and Lamley wrote, "There are no bounds to the Home Office's adherence. There are no bounds to the Home Office's adherence. Only a department woeful, unfit for purpose could imply that women should be grateful for their own rape, slavery, and trafficking. To use this to disqualify their asylum claim is beyond belief."
That's a bit crazy.
I must say, though, David Lammy and Diana, but they do raise these kind of concerns though when it comes across, because they always kind of champion in some of these things, man. I would say that in regards to this, I'll let you come and you know more about this than me. But the Home Office, I'm not sure. The reason why I'm not sure that they'll release such a statement is because of the stuff that we've seen with the Windrush generation. For me, that's shocking. That's actually shocking. So based on that alone, just release such a statement, because they do think like this.
Yeah.
They, in regards to this, when I was looking at the article, they said that I think they did some sort of research with Australian. Come on, you mentioned Australia, you mentioned Aborigines. Like, where do you want to go with this? Like, it's very like, where do you really want to go with this? Isn't it? So for me, it is alarming that you have a Home Office releasing such a statement. But for me, I'm not necessarily that shocked because of some of the stuff that's happened. That's to do with the Home Office when it comes to the Afro-Caribbean community anyway.
And I echo your sentiments, Kojo. I certainly agree with you as well. I guess seeing something like this is not surprising coming from the Home Office, given their sort of actions over the past few years.
So what they were doing was literally denying people their asylum claims, thinking that they can go back to Africa and they'll be living the good life.
This statement doesn't really sit, right with me, because it's basically generalizing all the victims of trafficking or all the women who have been trafficked and exploited sexually as those who have benefited from the exploitation or the abuse. Or basically what they're labeling this is that it is actually not exploitation, it is a prostitution business. Which is really, really wrong. I mean, for every case, it is different and it is unique in its own way. And yes, we do admit that, there are some victims who turn into perpetrators because of the circle. Yeah. Maybe when they were in the trafficking ring, they make the connection and then they have been able to, kind of position themselves in like the abusers. So these ones, they are not victims anymore. They are abusers because they put themselves at a position where they could have, been out of the system. However, they started to use the system to benefit themselves. Absolutely. So this is generalizing all survivors of trafficking who have been sexually exploited as basically people who were engaging in, willful prostitution. So every case needs to be treated differently in a unique way and understanding individual circumstances. If, for example, I've been sexually exploited and I've got, safety issues and I've claimed asylum, now my case needs to be looked at, for me as Pascal. But not saying that because Mercy from Nigeria, turn up to be benefiting from prostitution and therefore Pascal could be. Now, having worked with victims of trafficking, they suffer a lot of traumatic, experiences, psychological trauma. And these are things that sit with them sometimes for a lifetime, So basically labeling them as people who benefited from prostitution, it is not right, especially if it's coming from the government, a body which should be protecting victims of trafficking.
That's the whole, I guess, this is the whole thing. Look at how I'm getting so animated, man. But that is the stuff sometimes where it becomes quite shocking, just regarding the last point that you even made. Because if this same government is meant to be protecting people, then from that statement, I'm led to believe, what type of people are you actually looking out for?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Is there some sort of, hierarchical system? No, forget the African people, because they're not. Do you know what I mean? And that's what I'm led to believe. And that's a bit alarming. But then I guess, devil's advocate here, in regards to, because it seems that they use some sort of criteria, or they consider there are other factors that they consider in regards to making that decision. So even though it's individual, it's based on each individual, there might be criteria that you might base that decision on. So I'm guessing the source country as well, regarding the stigma attached to whatever crime or whatever activity, that is part of the criteria. Because I'm guessing from their statement, it's looking at the source country to say that looking at this, there might not be that much stigma. I'm guessing that's part of their looking at that. Is that part of it?
Well, I tried to read that submission from the Home Office to clarify on the statement they made. They were looking at issues around safety as well. If, for example, let's say the individual was put into the trafficking situation or recruited by their, families or communities, or maybe the trafficker is not in the community, So looking at the safety in that region, but also stigma, which is attached to victims of trafficking. But I saw one line which said that actually the level of stigma was so low.
Yes, that's what they said.
Which I really disagree with, because I visited survivors of trafficking in Nigeria. I sat with them, I spoke with them, and I know they actually went back empty-handed. And here, what they're being told is like, well, you went to Europe, you came back empty-handed.
Yeah, it's possible.
When actually,
what the heck have you been doing?
look at so and so,
Possible,
and that. So this comes with a lot of stigma, and some families do reject their very own. Just say, so they have nowhere to go.
Because it's like, what did you bring us? You just come here, but
Exactly.
we need to look after you.
Yeah.
Guys, just to touch back to what Mo was reading about the Labour MPs. I swear, from my understanding, Diana Arbor and David Lammy, they're not both blacks.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm quite shocking they're both actually saying that statement.
They never said it. It's the whole, which statement?
They were disagreeing with the
They
Home
were
Office.
disagreeing with the Home Office
Home
statement.
Office.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were not
Yeah.
agreeing. No.
Yeah.
They've been quite good advocates of some of these things. David Lammy, even when you look at the whole Windrush,
Yeah.
he's fine. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was really good to actually hear him speak about that in Parliament.
So what could we be doing to identify these things, or kind of stop it from happening, or not support
Can I
it?
start? When you go back home, stop flossing. Stop it. All these girls that you guys are taking back home, stop it now. Yeah? Stop getting all through. Stop getting the pedicure. Ask the question.
Well, the first thing I would like to say is that human trafficking is a problem which is affecting all of us as a community. And therefore, we need to take action. As black people, we need to really position ourselves at the forefront to tackle the issue, considering the fact that, the prevalence and the number of people trafficked from Africa, from Caribbean is not, not really coming into the light, mainly Africa. So we really need to own the issue as a problem which is affecting us as a community. What can we do? Tell the story as it is, Let's talk about the issue of human trafficking. When we see the boat sinking in the Mediterranean Sea, it is not a movie, okay? This could be people who have maybe started their journey willingly with smugglers, but then they got somewhere and got entangled into the web of trafficking. I interviewed other survivors who escaped from Libya or were returned from Libya to Nigeria. And basically, the fact that when they got there, they are held in debt bondage.
Yeah, I've
You
seen
know?
some of those videos. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also some really sad videos of people being auctioned, which came out, 2018. You can just imagine, We are not for sale. People are not for sale. So let's tell the story as it is. Let's share the story at home. Let's educate our children and our families and the people we connect with so they understand that this issue of human trafficking is not a whitish kind of people thing. It is something which is affecting us and affecting families. It's breaking down relationships in families. For example, if someone is trafficked or recruited from a family and the family, they had the hand in it, after escaping, will they go back to that family? Would you want to relate? To build that relationship will take time. So let's tell the story as it is. Have real conversation. It might seem difficult, but let's do it. Last year when I was in Uganda, I was using my nephew's phone and a telephone call came and he wasn't there. So while I was running to look for him, I answered the call and I just said, sorry, I'm using Harmony's phone. That's not his name, I'm going to take the phone to him. Yeah. So then, me being me, I just said, who are you? Because this is a young, boy who had just actually finished A-levels. I said, actually, I work for a recruitment agency, and I'm recruiting people to go and work in the Middle East, to go to Dubai. It's like, okay, so what sort of job? And do you know this is a young person? That, yes, I've been speaking with him. And I said, okay, so what sort of jobs? There's so many jobs working, in shopping malls, accountants, and just counting all this. Okay, why are you not doing that job?
Yeah.
You understand. So I just told him, do not call this number again. I'm going to list your number with the police because you are a trafficker. And he just hung up straight away.
Really?
It's interesting because I guess that's the sophistication in terms of like the networks. They're calling up and come across.
Exactly.
So professional that you're sort of sucked into that network. And then before you know it, you step in and.
But then that's the thing. If it was not even for your experience, because you could have maybe even your. It could be the parents of yours picking up and be like, what, they have this opportunity. Because sometimes it's how it's seen, isn't it? How they sell it.
Yes.
Where you have parents actually giving them their go-ahead. Because one of the things that I read was that it's easy sometimes for people to traffic because they have consent from their parents. And then you can understand why the consent is there. Because if you're pitching that to parents, they'll be like, okay, cool. Like my child is actually going on to something. So that's actually
that
very...
prestige feeling, my child is going abroad and things like that. Okay. So from that, I had to have a meeting. And I found out actually, these people were going to schools, waiting for those finishing their exams, going on vacation, and trying to, So
disgusting.
I notified our police officer friend, and he said, actually, we are aware of this ring of people, and we are hunting them down. Okay, and that leads me to the second point. What can we do to stop the issue? We need to be aware of the red flags, the indicators, the things to look out for in our communities that would actually indicate or show that someone could be a victim of trafficking or modern slavery. If you're in a nail bar, you're doing your nails, don't just sit there quiet and having your headphone and you're quiet. Connect. I like talking with people who are doing my hair. I don't do my nails. But when I'm doing my hair in a salon in Peckham, I am talking. I'm connecting and I'm saying.
But some might find, though, in the nail bars especially, that they don't speak English and you can't actually converse with them fully. So that kind of identifier aspect will be a bit more difficult.
They want to learn at the same time.
The thing is, though, human beings cannot fail to connect and communicate no matter what. There could be language barrier, but these people do understand broken English. And what you ask, you're not asking them that, how did you come here? No. Hello, how are you?
How was your day?
How's your day?
What are you doing after work?
They know
You know, exactly. So,
Because they start giving
Yeah.
little key things away.
you know, and then you can just pick, sometimes you can see the level of control. Maybe the madam is coming around and say, oh, Mercy, just work.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
you're
don't
talking
talk.
too much.
Yeah,
Things like, don't
yeah,
talk.
because you give
You know?
information.
Things like that. So you just kind of be aware of your surrounding, your environment, and connect with people, you know, in the nail bar salon, wherever you are, you know, car wash. So if you pick any indicator of trafficking, you know, it doesn't cause any harm to notify the police, you know, to report the case.
How would you
After
raise it?
all,
What's the keyword that you need to use when you're raising this?
there's no standard keyword.
No, it's like what?
I've come to report something suspicious.
I've just come across a lady or a man that I think might have been trafficked. Or I think that, I mean in that sense, but I know that there isn't. But it's like, yeah, like.
About 2 years ago, I took a telephone call from a member of the public, again, South London, Dagenham. Is that South London?
East London.
Yeah, I do remember this because I had to locate with the police. And the lady just said that, look, I don't want to give you my name, and you don't have to give your name anyway. Yeah. You can make an anonymous, report. And she said, I've been seeing people, you know, coming in and out of this address and entering into a van, and you don't see them. It's always like that.
Wow.
So I don't know, maybe it's not what I think, but I thought I should notify. Okay? So giving that,
they didn't give you a label. They just describe what
exactly,
they see rather than trying
give
to-
the address and why they're suspecting this, and then pass the information to the police. Do not start asking the questions around to verify if this could be a case of trafficking, because you'll be putting yourself at risk if truly that person, you know, or that is a practice which relates to trafficking and modern slavery. So you just observe, know the red flags that you're looking for, you know, people who are controlled, they have no relationship, they're in loneliness, psychological trauma, they look isolated and withdrawn, you know. So just pick out these signs, and then you can notify authorities.
But what if some people struggle with it because they just find it as snitching? Like, why are you reporting this one
I was
to the
just
police
about
or
to say
something
that.
or anything like
But on this occasion, you need to snitch, man. It makes no sense, because you know what it is? The parallel that you need to draw here is that we're talking about how many years ago that we're talking about slavery. And every time that slavery is being spoken about, I think that if I was doing that generation, if I was there, what would I have done? Like, how would that... Because I find it very... I find it mind-blowing that such thing was able to even happen. But they were talking about 2018 when I was watching videos of people in bondages. This is slavery.
Yes.
There is no difference to it. It's just not. It's not just concentrated in the whole African continent as it was before. But this is actually slavery. So for me, if I'm a snitch, you could call me a snitch any day. If I'm trying to because for me it's just ridiculous. We have to do something about that, and that's the passion side of it. I just had to say that because for me, one thing also that I find alarming is the Western policy. Because you look at Libya, for instance, and I'm not condemning or saying that Gaddafi, and when Gaddafi was in power. Right? So you look at when Gaddafi was in power and when Gaddafi was toppled, what has been happening in Libya in regards to that route. And this stuff that you're seeing in the Mediterranean, how did that come about in the first place? Yeah. Because these things were not happening, right? Yeah. So there are things at play. It's very, for me, it's very sad that when these people will end up in Italy and France, and then the same people that fostered these wars are then sitting there complaining they don't want to take these people in. When if you didn't foster these wars, some of these people will not be there in the first place. Do you know what I mean? So for me, like when I'm looking at this in regards to that whole snitching thing, I feel like you have to. For me, people are going through things that is out of like any human being should not be going through that. In all honesty.
Ask one thing, very important thing. What do you think about the internet?
Right, the internet. There is both the positive and the negative sides of the internet as well. Okay? Yeah. The positive side is that you can get information out there around, awareness or, good information that can help the community. The negative side is that if, for example, there is like a lot of grooming which happens, online and issues like that, it can be really difficult to crack into and get all of it. Talking on online sexual exploitation, which is one form of exploitation which might not even require crossing borders, and people are just trafficked and maybe confined in a room, in a home somewhere, in a hotel room, and they are made to perform sexual acts, and this is recorded and exactly so this is very common in Asia. Philippines, for example, is known for online sexual exploitation a lot. I did kind of checked with Nigeria if this was crossing, but it's not really so common in Africa yet. But we cannot say it's not happening.
Africa don't play with kids like that.
The reason why I asked that...
Africa don't play with kids like that.
Right, so we're talking about trafficking here. African values in Africa will look after each other. In Africa, I wouldn't be taking advantage of you and trafficking you and locking you in my basement and bringing other men to exploit you in my own home.
It's true.
We all values. So we cannot say, no, it's not happening simply because it's not been brought out to light. We just need to safeguard against it to make sure that it doesn't gain ground in Africa or in our communities.
The reason why I brought up the internet is because this Western world, especially the younger children, the age of below 5 that I around, most of the time they're on the phone, laptop, iPad, the mom, the parents' phone, always playing games.
Yeah.
And that's like a good kind of like alerting warning.
Yeah. So parents should be able to set parental control that would block children from accessing certain websites or sites. Google, for example, has been really campaigning for safety, online safety as well. So that's one area that we need to take responsibilities as parents to safeguard our children when they are online or using the internet. I wanted to add one point around what we can do to, stop human trafficking or to fight human trafficking in our communities. Again, it's still around awareness. African communities, we've got so many gatherings that we do attend. Yeah. We are actually social animals. I was watching something on BBC of the Igbo community in Liverpool. This is a tribe in Nigeria. Yeah. So they meet every year and they just have a lot of celebration around food and music, dancing and things like that. Ugandan community, they do have, community meetings that they're gathering, probably Sierra Leone, Ghana, so many different, communities. We do have these gatherings. It's in our blood. So how about us using these opportunities to create more awareness on human trafficking? You can actually just invite someone. There are so many agencies, organizations. If you invite them, the Salvation Army, for example, if you invite them to come and give a session, about human trafficking, they will come. Okay. They will talk. Our churches, there was a controversy around churches in Nigeria being, drawn into trafficking ring and being used for trafficking people. Now, why don't churches mobilize African churches and talk about human trafficking so that your congregation can actually get to know what constitutes human trafficking and that. So we just need to look at this as a problem which is deeply affecting us. Already we are facing challenges at home. We do not want to make it worse by enslaving our very own or probably covering our faces when we see that the issue is so real and it's really affecting our communities.
Yeah. I agree.
All right. Well, I mean, this has been a really, really interesting conversation. Uncovered a lot of things, and I'm sure there's a lot more that we could delve in as well, especially in terms of like the organ trafficking as well. That's a very big aspect of it. But yeah, listeners, if you have enjoyed it, we can definitely let us know your thoughts. I did want to take this moment also just to just highlight some options in terms of if you are in Wharf Road, Camberwell, Peckham, South London, and you need to go get your nails and stuff done. Also the disclaimer that not all Vietnamese or Chinese nail bars support human trafficking. But if you do want to support black-owned nail bars, there are some other options that you might want to go to. They may not be as cheap, but then you are also supporting your community and your people. So there is one in Brixton, Cold Harbour Lane, Amma. That's a nail bar. There's one in Shoreditch, Flawless Touch. There's another one in Shoreditch as well, Colour Riot Nails. And Sheer Beauty as well in Stratford. If that's not a distance for you, or if you're them people that are travelling from outside of South London to come in. There is that option. But yeah, it's been a really, really interesting topic. And yeah, we'd really like to hear more about what everyone can say, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the LDN Perspective podcast. Please get in contact with us. We want to create more of an organic platform. So if you have any questions, please check our Instagram page, which is LDN Perspective. You could also reach us on Twitter, Perspective LDN. And please, you could always drop us an email at ldnperspective@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
Perspectives, different views, one voice.